And we are live. First 2 seconds of this is always terrifying. There you go. Attendees are going up. There we go. For anyone that didn't join yesterday, just at the start, we'll wait a couple of minutes for everyone to join. Grab yourself a glass of water or a drink, and then we'll start probably about 2 minutes past once we've had an opportunity for everyone to join. In the meantime, JD, how's your day going?
It's just getting started. It's good though. It's 10 a.m. here. I'm in Oregon, beautiful, lovely Central Oregon. No snow yet, but it's coming. Mountains have snow. And kids are inside. So currently it's a good day.
Are we waiting for them to come screaming past at some point, or are they?
Yep. I'm waiting for them to barrel outside and come into the office and, cause general havoc.
Oh, nice. So the life of kids, isn't it? I'm going to apologize at the start for everyone that's watching. I cannot get rid of that glow. I'm not in Oregon right now. I'm in London. Long story short, I have a baby who may cry at some point, but I'm hoping that my room is soundproofed enough that you can't hear her. But she has been screaming all day. So if she does come in, bear with me. Give it one more minute. Start, and then if people join later, that's absolutely fine. So from an agenda perspective, what we'll be going through today's backend. So we'll be going through backend development as a whole. We've picked on a couple of languages, the main ones that we see within our client base. And what we're doing in a second is we're doing introductions to anyone that hasn't spent much time with HackerJob before, understands what we do, and we'll get JD to go through a little bit about his background. We've picked a few languages because of that. At the end, we will be going through some more complex stuff, like distributed systems, cloud computing, multi-threading. So there'll be a chance to go through that stuff. This presentation will probably take in the region of 25 to 30 minutes. So there's going to be loads of time for Q&As at the end. We won't be using the raise hand functionality. So any questions you've got, please stick them into Q&A. And then there's also the chat function that everyone will see at the bottom. When using it, if you want to send anything to me or JD, use the @panelists. If you want to send it to everyone else in the room and want to have a conversation between yourselves while this is ongoing, feel free to use all attendees and everything go on from that side. So why don't I start with my introduction? So I'm Darren. I head up our new markets function at HackerJob. I've been with the business for 6.5 years. So I'm one of the original members of the team. In terms of what HackerJob do as a business, in case anyone's not come across us before, is we are a talent platform specifically for tech. So looking at software engineering, data science, data engineering, tests, DevOps, etc. So I head up our new markets, which is in the US right now. So big push for us, but we've been around in the UK for about 8 years now. JD, do you want to do an introduction to yourself?
Sure. My name is JD, and as mentioned, I am zooming in from Oregon, Central Oregon, here, a small town called Sisters, about 3,000 people. And from my time in talent acquisition, done some full cycle, but now I'm sourcing or talent research specifically. I am currently at Stripe, where my sole focus is finding back-end engineers, currently focused namely on staff engineers, which at Stripe, there's no principal after that. It's just staff is our highest level of engineering. And that has been my focus for the past 2.5 quarters. And prior to that, I was on our LATAM team, building out the sourcing and recruiting function on Stripe's LATAM talent team as the sole TA individual for about 2 quarters. And now we've just been absorbed into the greater function with a reorg, as everyone is currently aware of.
Nice. Awesome. Cool. So let's jump into things. So what is back-end development? So the way that let me just zoom this out slightly so everyone can see it. So the way that I always think about backend development is the logic of an application. So if you think about backend, front end, backend is very much the brain of the human. So it's pushing everything forward and making everything work. Whereas if you look at front end, which we'll go through, I believe tomorrow, front end is more about the face of the application. So it's what you see and what you do. You don't see what's happening in the back end. It's just working in the background like your brain does. So what it's doing is taking a request from the user, it retrieves the information then from a database, and it provides a response back to the user. So when you go into a website, that's essentially what's happening. It's pulling all that data through so that then the front end of the application can work, and then you can see what you want to do on that side. Traditionally, there's a couple of different types of backend applications. So you've got web applications, you've got desktop applications, you've got mobile, and then you've got embedded. We'll go through in some depth these in a later session, but those are typically what you'll be interacting with on a daily basis. So when you look at backend language, a couple of things are quite important. So you get different versions. So I suspect for the tech recruiters in the room, which I suspect is a lot of you, given you're in a bit of a wrong session if you're not here to talk about tech recruitment. But versions are what is things up to. So we'll go through these at a language level in a second, but each version is updating the functionality of that language. And you've got frameworks. So if we look at Java, for example, the frameworks for that typically are Spring, but you also get Hibernate. So what a framework is doing, it's a library of pre-existing code, which can be used to streamline your development process. So it takes you away from having to start from greenfield every time you start your new projects. And then unit testing tools. So unit testing is used to break stuff down, code down into micro levels or units, so you can test each one. And again, we'll go through this on the session on next Monday. But the whole point of unit testing within the backend language section is that you can then figure out if there's something broken. And me and JD will probably touch on this later, but what we're seeing more and more in the market now is the importance of software engineers to be able to do their own testing. So we'll start with Java. The reason we kind of chosen Java as first is we typically see it within the majority of the customers that we're working with. So Java, C# tend to be the big two, and then you get a few more afterwards. But Java is one of the most popular languages, and it's being used to create web applications and platforms. So the reason it's so popular is that it's very, very flexible, and it allows developers to write code that would run on any machine, regardless of any kind of architecture or platform. So it's a very flexible language. So that's why you see it, a lot of enterprise businesses use it. And what we generally see is that if people aren't using Java as a backend language, they've got it somewhere in their tech stack somewhere. It's typically only smaller kind of startup businesses or the fast-growing scale-up businesses that aren't using Java or C# in any kind of form. One of the things that I always like to touch on is that because of the fact that people see Java and they see JavaScript, they assume there's an association like there is for C++, C, and C#. There isn't actually an association at all. It just is by chance. So my favorite analogy is if you look at pills and pillows, they might have the same letters in there. They're not associated in any way, shape, or form. So take that out of your mind when you see Java and JavaScript, that they're very, very similar. They're not at all. One of them is used for back end, one of them is used for front end. Although JavaScript, is people probably know, is being used more for full stack, so with Node, which we'll touch on later. So what are we looking at when we are looking at Java? So generally, we don't see many customers that are looking for Java with versions 11 or below. So it's kind of 11 plus is what we see. Java 14 is probably the least I've seen in a lot of companies recently. And then the latest version is currently Java 18. From a testing perspective, typically, if you're doing unit testing, you use JUnit. And then from a perspective, and this will be a recurring theme, a lot of these in-demand and red flags as we go through the languages. But typically what we're seeing is you're looking for people that have some appreciation for microservices architecture, some appreciation for DevOps tooling, specifically around containerization and CI/CD. And then databases. Typically, you're looking for someone that has a appreciation of both relational and non-relational databases. which again we'll touch on in another one. From an older framework perspective, you're looking at stuff like J2EE. You're looking at Hibernate, Swing, and Struts. From a framework, you're probably looking at more on the Spring side. If you see someone that has mobile development experience and you're looking for backend, although yes, you can use Java for mobile and they're very, very similar in that way, it's not really what you're looking for. So I would say if you see stuff like Android SDK on someone's profile, they're probably in a different area of work than what you're kind of looking for. If you see someone that has responsibilities like fixing, monitoring tickets, and then support, again, if you're looking for more that staff level of engineer, they're probably not what you're looking for. They're more working on the bug fixing. So if you're looking for someone that's is creating complex applications, try to stick away from that stuff. And as I kind of touched on, despite the name, Java and JavaScript aren't related. Then we look at C#. So C# can be used to create almost anything, but it's particularly strong at building Windows desktop applications and games. C# can be used on mobile, and you see stuff like Cordova as well, which comes from the C# family. But typically, you would be looking for someone that has developed in web applications, and it's becoming more and more popular, like I say, in mobile development. But what we're seeing actually within our own client base is we're seeing that people are moving more towards like React Native and Flutter and that kind of stuff, which again was touched on in a later session. So what are you looking for when you see C#? Obviously, from a version perspective, you're looking at C# 10 from testing. JUnit is on there, but it's more NUnit. From framework side, .NET Core is becoming more and more important. So if people aren't aware of this, C# used to be a language which was very much in-house. You couldn't make any adjustments to it. It was very much held back. So closed source. But it's changed in the last couple of years with the introduction of .NET Core, where it's much more of an open source language. And if people don't know what open source means, it means that as a developer, I can play around with things a lot more. So I can go out and make changes to the language, which will have a knock-on effect to the overall. Again, we're looking at microservices, data, DevOps, data, etc. From an older frameworks perspective, if you're seeing stuff like VB.NET, and I'd probably argue even ASP.NET, if you're building complex applications, are some of the frameworks you want to stay away from. If you're seeing stuff like desktop frameworks, so WinForms or WPF, again, probably more of the old school stuff. And then the same kind of responsibilities from a fixing you want to stick away from. Mobile development side, Xamarin, Cordova, they tend to be from the C# family, so I would probably stick away from that stuff. Python. So Python is one of those languages similar to Java, actually, that it's very, very flexible. So Python can be used across a lot of different areas. So you see a lot of people using it when they're looking at scripting. In DevOps, you see a lot of people using it when they're looking at data. So I think Python, probably more than any other language, even more so than Java, is a language where you have to be very mindful about what someone is doing with Python when you're looking at whether this is the right developer for you. So because that's a general purpose language, so it's used for desktop and web applications. When the reason for it being so flexible is it's often used to develop complex scientific and numerical applications. So you see a lot of it in data science and data engineering, and it's used to facilitate data analysis and visualization. So what we're looking at from a Python side, so the version currently is 3.10, and then 3.11, we actually pushed this session back by a week. So it's going to come out in a couple of days' time. So hallelujah, we're now going to get a new version of Python. From a testing perspective, we're looking at PyTest. And then from a framework side, you're looking at Django and then Flask from a web application perspective. And then, like I touched on earlier, what you probably want to avoid quite a lot is looking at someone that has more of that data experience, more of that DevOps experience. JD, we've gone through 3 languages so far. Anything you'd add, anything you would... all good?
I think the biggest takeaway is, and you mentioned on each one, is simply with each language, there's a specific use and there's a general use.
Yeah.
Python, like you said, Java even, understanding when we're looking for these individuals, understanding what that individual is going to be utilizing that language for is like paramount, because like you mentioned, someone could be using Python to, create something that's, vastly intricate, or it could just be a general purpose thing and we're going through a bunch of numbers and data. It just simply depends. And so to keep an eye out for those things. And then just want to reiterate, Java still, just every job that comes through for me right now at a staff level backend is Java, Java, Java. So
yeah, Java is not a language that's going away. And we were talking before we started this session that if you look at some of the languages that have stuck around forever, so stuff like Java, stuff like C#, stuff like C++, it's been that they've evolved over time. And I think that you see some languages that are slow to evolve, and that's why you start seeing them drop out. Cool. So next one we'll go on to is PHP. And I think from a PHP side, it's very, very interesting because we see PHP in a lot of our clients still, but we're seeing a lot of them move more towards Node. So from an engineer perspective, it's one of those languages that isn't hugely in demand if you're an engineer. Most engineers know that this is, if you're using PHP, it's a language you can excel very well in, and it's great for web development, as I've kind of put there. But generally it's used for less complex applications, and therefore as an engineer, it's a language that I'm not going to earn as much as I probably would if I use Java, Python, Golang, something like that, or a Node. So generally we're seeing that the PHP supply is hard to go by. Not that people don't know PHP, but more that people are moving and transitioning away from it. So what we're seeing in the market right now is a lot of PHP developers are moving more towards Node as their language of choice. So from version perspective, you're looking at version 8.1. 8.2 is out in November. From a testing perspective, you're looking at PHP unit frameworks. Generally, and you'll see on here, there's a lot of different frameworks on here. But generally, we're seeing Symfony, Laravel. You see Zend quite often, but I would say that they're the two that are mainly used. Falcon is another one, but I'd probably say that you stick with the other two. From a red flags perspective, so if you're seeing people that have WordPress, they're probably more on their content management systems, so they're not building applications. So I've got a few friends that work with WordPress. It's a great language to use if you're building quite simple pages, but you're not going to be building out big applications if you're using WordPress. And then I would look at avoiding people that have used PHP. Well, I would be asking the question, how have you used PHP? Because you can use it on some of the front end stuff as well. So if you're not asking that question, you could end up with either WordPress or someone that's using it more for the front end than necessarily the back end. So again, I'll keep reiterating this as we go, but it's important to understand how is someone using it. So don't just utilize someone's CV and see, okay, they've used Java, cool, that's a box ticked. Always be asking the question, how have you used it? Where have you used it? And what and what kind of projects have you used it in? Because we get a lot of developers that say that they may have used the language, but when you start delving into it, they may have used it in some pair programming, which is great, but it's not necessarily that you could leave them on their own and they'd be able to build out applications for you. So I'd be always asking those questions. So Node. So Node is actually not a language. It's a runtime environment, and I think that's where people get confused quite a lot of the time. So it's built on top of JavaScript, so it's built in JavaScript. So we're seeing this much more frequently in the market than we probably would have 10 years ago. So Node is becoming the language of choice alongside Golang and I think in the future Rust as the language of choice for scale-ups. So you see a lot of those that are using it like that, and the reason for it is it's perfect for that kind of data intensive real-time applications, and you can use it across multiple devices. So if you look at WhatsApp is all written in Node, and it's because you can use it on mobile, you can use it on desktop, you can use it on web. So that means that it's one language that covers everything, and because JavaScript is such a flexible language, it means that it's very easy to use it across all areas. So from a Node side, version 18, There was 19 that was planned in October. As far as I'm aware, it's not been released yet. I've been on paternity for 2 weeks, but I have had a quick look today and I couldn't see any evidence that it's been released. From a testing side, anyone that knows anything about JavaScript will know that the easiest way to figure out the frameworks of JavaScript is to think about hot drinks. So Mocha and Jest are the two from a testing side. Frameworks, so you're looking at Express, you're looking at Meteor, and you're looking at Sails. And then the same kind of stuff from a desirable perspective. Red flags, so Node can be used more on the front end from a compiler perspective. So when you're chatting to someone about Node, understand, are we talking about Node as the backend language, or are we talking about more the compiler side, so the NPM side? And then again, touch on the same thing as with PHP. What is their knowledge in backend and front end, and what are you looking for? So if you're looking more for a backend developer, ask them questions around backend. So asking stuff around databases and CI/CD and stuff like that will get you a long way to understand whether it's how they're using that tool. C#. So I would say alongside Java and Python, we tend to see this more in the solutions that are used to develop like engines or trading tools. So C++ is used heavily at places like Bloomberg, where they're building out big trading tools. So it's quite an intensive tool. So it uses a lot of computer resources. So it's used often in like game engines and games and desktop applications. So if you look at most of the games that we've built around the world, yes, they'll have other languages they're using as well, but they will start around the C++ area. So from a C++ perspective, you're currently on version 20. And then from a testing side, CPP unit is the main one. Frameworks, we tend to see that frameworks aren't as important when it comes to C++, but you're looking at STL and Qt and Boost as the main ones on that side. As I kind of touched on from a C++ perspective at the start, game development and animation is often where C++ is used alongside embedded. So it's important when you're asking around C++, how are they using it? So if they're using it from an embedded perspective, they're not going to be the right developer for you if you're looking to build out trading systems. So ask that kind of question. And then also ask about like web browsers, how they're using it. Cool. So there's a few different concepts here. So we'll go through them in kind of top level here, and then we'll go through them a little bit later as well. So multi-threading. So multi-threading is basically the ability of central processing units to provide multi-threads of execution concurrently. So everything working concurrently. And then concurrency is the ability of different parts or units of the program, algorithm, or problem to be executed out of order or in partial order. So basically, as you're pulling out data, it's working in different kind of ways, and it's looking at, okay, what is the most important thing that's going to pull at this moment in time? Latency is looking at response. So what you're looking at, if you look at low latency, is it describes how the network optimizes processing high volumes of data messages without delay. So if you think about banking, for example, if you have high latency, it'll basically mean the stuff isn't coming through in the right kind of ways. And then you're looking at load balancing. So is the traffic of your website, your application, running at the right kind of level? So when you look at Black Friday, for example, if you have a application or a website and you haven't sorted out the load balancing, what that'll basically mean is it could take the servers down. So I've seen it a lot over the years, especially when governments announce a new area. So when COVID hit, I think a lot of the government websites and the COVID vaccination centers weren't really prepared from a load balancing perspective, and it completely took down applications. So it's really importantly distributing the balance around your networks. Cool. So microservices. So there's two different types of architecture. There's traditionally two different types of architecture. So traditionally, you're looking at a lot of the architecture will be built in a monolith. So everything interconnected, and it basically means that if one thing goes down, everything goes down. So what we're seeing more and more now is that companies are moving more towards a microservices architecture. So what that basically means is everything is connected, but it's held in its own area. So I always think about it almost like containerization, where everything is contained in its own little way so that the whole application doesn't go down. And from a balancing perspective, everything is held out in isolation so that you are you're balancing everything across the board. Sorry, I've realized I'm repeating myself there. So why would you look at microservices? I've kind of touched on some of this, but it means that you can update stuff and deploy it separately. So you're not relying on, if you want to make a change to the monolith, to have to take everything apart in order to do it. Like I kind of touched on, one bug in the microservice doesn't affect another microservice. So it means that everything can function. And if you see that, I don't know, one microservice goes down, you can then look at that microservice in isolation. You're not scrolling through lots and lots of code. So when we were touching on unit testing earlier, similar kind of thought process behind it. It's easy.
One thing to put in there just really quick. What I'm seeing, especially at Stripe currently, as we are hiring a massive amount of staff level engineers, is that every single one is coming with a necessity, or we're looking for this individual to have experience moving from monolith to microservices and leading that migration. And most of those projects are like, you know, things that have been working for 10 years that we're now moving and transitioning, and we're looking for all of those. So like just adding to the importance of, you know, monolith versus microservices and vice versa.
So you're looking for people that have monolithic experience, but have dealt with microservices, or how?
So looking for individuals that have migrated from monolith to microservices.
Okay, fine.
The individuals I'm looking for specifically are individuals that have led that migration over, say, 2 quarters, 4 quarters, however long it takes. Because for us, that's a massive undertaking.
Fun. Okay. So that's a journey you're on at Stripe at the moment. So you're looking for people to lead on that. Makes complete sense. Awesome. From a scalability perspective, so it offers more scalability as each unit can be scaled independently. And then it offers a lot more freedom in terms of tech selection. I suspect that most of the people on this call are working on organizations that either use multiple languages, or you've moved from one language to another over time. And JD, obviously you went before the call, we were talking about how you're moving stuff from Ruby to Java at the moment. So the more interconnected everything is, the less easy it is to change from one language to another. Cloud computing. I've spoken about cloud computing to my parents before, and they genuinely think that everything is up in the cloud. So when you're looking at cloud computing, basically what it's doing is moving away from hosted on-premise servers. So anyone that is as old as me would have worked in organizations previously where there's a big server room. But over time, what we're seeing is stuff is going into the cloud. And what that essentially means is that all of your data, all your servers are stored somewhere else. So there's lots out in the desert in the US, in Europe, you've got a big center in Dublin. So across the board, what we're seeing is more companies moving to that. We'll touch on it in a later session, but I think that most companies will have a setup of having some on premise and then some in the cloud. The reason behind that is mainly because of the fact that you aren't over reliant on cloud services going up and down. But what I would say is, having been in New Orleans just before COVID hit and chatting to someone from that used to work for the mayor, if you don't put stuff in the cloud, as soon as there is, let's say, water damage, it means that you'll lose all your information. So they lost all the DEFRA records within New Orleans when they were hit by Hurricane Katrina. So make sure a lot of it is held up in the cloud somewhere. Cool. So what are the benefits of cloud computing? So scalability, you can scale up and scale down depending on the resource required for a certain job. From a cost perspective, because you can scale it up and scale down, you can scale up what you need, and that means that you're not paying over the odds for it. If you have a big server room, you're basically paying to power that server room no matter what time of the day it is. So from a cost perspective, if you put stuff in the cloud, if you're, I don't know, you've not got much traffic on your website between the hours of 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., you can then scale that up, you can scale that down and then scale it back up when you get to peak hours. From a device availability perspective, like I kind of touch on, you need to have a big room if you're going to put it all in the servers. And also from an upgrades perspective, I've put simple upgrades, but essentially if it's in the cloud, you don't have to worry about upgrading stuff. You worry about AWS or Azure or GCP doing it. Distributed systems. So distributed systems is basically a compute environment where multiple components are spread out across multiple computers or networks. So you'll kind of see it here, that there's different nodes within it, and then it's managed within one application. So it's got, if we're looking at it, we're looking at actions that passed. So stuff like message queuing, so Kafka. So anyone that doesn't, I can now hear my baby, so hopefully you don't hear that. From a message queuing perspective, if we're looking at that, you're basically looking at, okay, if something is requested, how quickly is that message pulled and what is pulled first? So the importance of that. So from a benefits of distributed systems, so there's no singular point of failure. So that means that, again, stuff doesn't go down. Durability, so you're continuously making copies of data as it's pulled around the different nodes. And then scalability, so serving across multiple machines gives you a lot more flexibility to scale over time. JD, anything to add on anything we've gone through?
Nope, not as of yet.
Awesome. So touching on a couple of bits here. So operating systems, the reason I've added some of this is teaching to suck eggs, I'm going to be honest, but I had a question the other day about what is an operating system. So I thought I'd add in a couple of bits on this side. So operating system is basically where all of the applications are managed. So your OS is stuff like Windows, Linux, or Android. So that's probably what you're looking at on that side. And anyone that uses Mac like me, Mac OS is essentially. From a testing side, so as we move into more of an agile environment, testing is continuously done. So in the old world, when you look at stuff like a waterfall process, you would get through the entirety of your coding sessions, and then you would test your code at that point. The problem with that is that it's all well and good if you're coding and there's no bugs in your code, but the minute that you've just wasted a huge amount of time. So we're now looking at more continuous testing. So stuff like TDD and BDD that we'll touch on in I believe in another session are becoming more and more important. And then source code repository. So that's basically a file archive or web hosting facility. So you're looking at stuff like GitLab, which probably hurts you right now, JD, given what we spoke about before this call, Bitbucket and GitHub. So when you're looking at someone's personal projects, a lot of it will be stored in these source code repositories. So I know on our side, from a HackerJob side, when we're looking at candidates, we make sure that we give access to source code repositories, because then it means that you can look at not just what the candidate has done within their day-to-day jobs, but also what are they doing from a personal project perspective, because developers are very passionate about their roles, so they likely are doing more than just their 9-to-5s from a coding perspective. And then finally, we'll kind of touch on the cloud architecture. So what cloud architecture is? It refers to the components and subcomponents required for cloud computing. So you're typically looking at of like back-end platforms, front-end platforms, and then cloud-based delivery. And then that goes into a network, and all that combines then together to build out cloud computing architecture. So what we're seeing at the moment is more and more importance within our client base on cloud architects. So it's becoming a big need within the marketplace. So I've just added a few recruitment insights at the end, just before we get to the Q&A section. So this is a breakdown of, if we look at backend developers as a whole, so this is looking at all languages, not just Java or C#. We carry all this data on HackerJob. So if for any reason you want to understand what is the breakdown for your marketplace in Java or C#, we can give that from a HackerJob perspective, and all that data is held for our own databases. So currently 13.2% of backend developers are based in San Fran, 8.4 based out of New York, 8.1 in Seattle, 4.9 in LA, and then 4.8 in Washington, or the surrounding kind of area. But I think the important thing, especially if you're looking at the areas that actually have fewer jobs or a lot less jobs compared to how many developers are out there, is I would say probably stick away from LA if you're looking at a budget, because LA tends to be quite an expensive place to hire out of. But recently, from our own client base perspective, we've seen that a lot of our clients are hiring out of Boston. That's tending to be a good area to get developers from if you're looking at either a hybrid model where someone maybe needs to go in once a quarter, or you're looking at fully remote. Tends to be quite a good place to hire for. And then Washington tends to be the last one. Again, Washington tends to be higher on the higher end from a salary side, but there are a lot less jobs in the Washington area compared to the amount of candidates that are out there. And don't get me wrong, it's still about 4-1, but it's a lot less than you're probably looking at from that side. These have been the companies that in the last 12 months have hired the most engineers, also have the most requirements that are open at the moment. This is from our own pulling of data off the internet. So all of these companies are hiring in instead at the moment. I think there's probably not many in there that you'd be massively surprised about. I was very surprised when I saw that Capital One within their area currently the highest hire is in the US. So very, very interesting. But I think you probably would expect Apple and Microsoft to be there or thereabouts on that side. And then finally, from a back-end side, this is looking at purely back-end engineers. This isn't looking at a full stack, or this isn't looking at people that are more front-end focused. There's 1.9 million engineers in the US. Active vacancies in the US right now, there's 91,200. But then when you look at how many active engineers there are, you're looking at more like 11,500. So there's about 9-1 jobs per candidate. So as much as you can be selective on the candidates you want to hire, more than ever in this marketplace, you have to be able to explain to a candidate why they should come work for you. It very much is a candidate focused market. So I would always say, don't just focus on the benefits, but me and JD were talking beforehand, you need to sell on the projects people are going to be working on. It's not just about the money anymore, because there's a lot of companies that are paying good money. It's more about what do they get to work with, and also what technologies are they going to get to work with as well, not just the great projects, but also how are you going to take their career forward? Because especially at the staff engineer and above level, these people don't need to move. And I think from a market perspective right now, there isn't a huge amount of stability. You would have seen, I'm sure, and hopefully none of you have been affected by this, but there is a lot of people getting made redundant at the moment. So stability is everything to people. So they're going to want to understand what stability do they have in their roles. Jedi, is there anything you'd add before we jump into the Q&As?
No, that's this paints a wonderful picture to let everyone know, and I'm sure everyone's in the same background of hiring talent or acquiring talent, that there are still plenty of jobs. And this is an opportunity to be selective and make sure that you're hiring at the highest bar for your organization and presenting your hiring managers and your teams with the best available candidates with so many jobs available, with not so many individuals looking to make a move or being available at the time.
Yeah. And I think that and we'll move into Q&As in a second, but something you said plugged my mind. So I think that when you are looking at a developer, it's always good to look at acumen rather than finished product, because I think that if you want a staff engineer, yes, you probably need to find someone who's 90% there, but that 10% is always quite useful to be able to go outside of it. I think that if you are looking for someone that already knows everything that you are looking for, they're probably going to get bored in their job quite quickly. So it's always good to look at someone that you can bring in, and you can teach them a new language, you can teach them a new skill, because they'll be appreciative of that and they're likely to stay longer, because we all know that in this market people move around quite quickly. So we'll start on the Q&As. Jenny, I'll throw them to you, and then I'll answer off the back of it. So first question, what is the most requested position right now and why?
What we are seeing right now, and this was similar when my time at GitLab 2 years ago to now my time at Stripe for the past year and a half or so. Staff level engineers. I'll start with senior engineers always, sure. Yes. But staff engineers, for the most part, always. Actually, at Stripe, we kind of have like an open door policy on staff engineers. If we find a staff engineer, we will out there that's available, we will find a place for them. And this is because with how fast and I'll say progressive certain technologies are, let's say fintech, for example, yep. We have to be moving and iterating upon products, new products releases at all times. And what we're finding out right now is that we have the engineering power to do so, the manpower or the people power to do so. Yep. We do not have that senior leadership that's able to delegate, manage the project from end to end, and collaborate cross-functionally with multiple teams throughout Stripe, whether it's engineering, product, leadership, whatever. And also hop in and, if there's an issue, they're able to solve that as well and mentor those junior or engineers below them. That is the biggest issue currently that we are running into. Not enough senior leadership to push through the products that we have on the calendar.
Nice. And going back to a previous slide, I guess from a location perspective, like when I know you focus more on the Latin market in recent quarters, but where do you tend to see, at least in the US, where do you tend to see from a locality perspective, you're making a lot of hires right now?
I'll let you guess it. It's generally Northern California, Bay Area. Seattle is big. We do have a handful of the staff level or senior leadership and the engineering side within New York. Yep. Boston area is another. But for the most part, we're seeing a lot in Seattle, a lot in San Francisco, and then in New York as well. And obviously the remote work has, sporadically moved people across, but I would say I'm still seeing a lot of engineers at that senior leadership level, the staff level, that like to be in office surrounded by, the team members, things like that. So, yeah.
It's interesting. So at that kind of higher level, you see remote as sometimes a bit of a barrier.
And at Stripe, we kind of offer, like multiple tiers. You can do it. Like I'm fully remote. I've actually been in an office once, but I've only been in an office once in the past like 6 years. But at that staff level, yes, you're looking for a lot of individuals that aren't really looking. And this is my experience sourcing.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
We're not seeing a lot of individuals that are saying like, hey, I want to live in, I don't know, Idaho, like Boise, even though that's up and coming, I know. But like we get a lot of individuals in the Seattle area. And a lot of people that will move from San Francisco to the Seattle area. But that's a lot we're seeing.
Awesome. What should I be looking for when hiring a back-end developer? I think we kind of touch on a lot of these bits, but I'll jump in, and then if you've got anything to add at the end, JD, feel free to jump in. I think from a software engineering perspective, it really depends what you're looking for, and as we move through different areas in other days this week, it'll kind of hold true. But it depends on whether you want to split out your team. So are you looking for someone who's purely back-end? Are you looking for someone that knows stuff like containerization and CI/CD? Are you looking for someone that can do unit testing, TDD? So I think it depends on exactly what you're looking for. Each company will be a little bit different. So I know there's a few companies that distribute systems are super important, or multi-threading is super important, or microservices is super important. So I think it probably depends on what is your setup for your teams, and also what are you looking to achieve, because what you are looking to achieve might be very different to what your rivals down the road are looking to achieve. So I would say more and more we're seeing people or clients looking for people with stuff like testing and cloud, but it really depends on what you're looking for.
Yeah, I would just add to a +1 to everything that Darren said. And I would just simply add that we get a lot of requests that our engineers, our back-end engineers have some sense. They don't have to have worked with front end, but they have some sense of what their work how it'll affect or drive the front end. We have a lot, especially at that higher level, that senior and staff level, a lot of, I know this is like a hot button topic or keyword, but that cross collaboration or that we have going on between our front end teams and our back end teams. So if we're looking for a senior that's going to lead a small team or a staff that's leading a larger team, they're going to want to have some idea of how that front end is working.
Yeah. And it's it's been a really interesting change in the last few years, that I think that traditionally, if people think about engineers, they think about someone that codes in the corner, headphones on, that isn't really interacting. But that's not really the case anymore. Like, no. Or because it's so important to be able to collaborate with both business and tech. So I think that when you're looking at a back-end engineer, it's probably important to be screening for that stuff as well. And there's a screening call actually in a minute, which I'm going to chat to you, given you were talking about staff engineers. But I think that screening someone's ability to talk both tech and business is going to be thoroughly important. Someone asked about, have we got this data and insights from a UK perspective? We absolutely do. If you are working with some of the team at HackerJob already, feel free to reach out to them. We publish this data every quarter, so we've definitely got it in the UK. Obviously, these sessions are more focused on US data, but reach out to someone at HackerJob if you're working with someone. If not, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I can produce or I can send you the published data. Jay, I'm going to chuck this one at you. Is hiring software engineers in LA more expensive than markets like San Francisco?
I wouldn't say it's more expensive, but hiring in LA is different. A lot of companies don't have offices in LA. Like, we have a satellite office in LA, you know? So I guess it's kind of up in the air. San Francisco is still San Francisco is what everyone's pay is based off of on a global level. So that kind of answers that question. Is San Francisco will always be, at least for the time. I don't always say always. I should retract that. But currently, and for the past decade, San Francisco has been the highest pay area. But now we're also seeing that with the remote, people aren't settling for like, hey, if you're going to pay me this much in San Francisco, you should pay me this much in Kentucky. Like, that is happening. And so, but yeah, I mean, hiring in LA is expensive. Hiring in any major metropolis is expensive. San Francisco is always going to be the most expensive.
I would say that the ones that I tend to see being the most expensive areas to hire within, and feel free to add any on here, JD. So San Fran is always top of the list. I would then say it probably goes Seattle, then New York, then Boston, Washington. I'd say they're probably the big five when you're looking at expenses. I always speak to and see quite a lot of good talent down in Florida. So Miami tends to be a very good place to hire engineers. It's not on this kind of list, but that's one that I always reach out to. And there's a lot of good companies in the Carolinas as well. So look at North Carolina in particular. There's some really, really good brands there. So I would be looking at that from a locality perspective.
The Carolinas have like the triad, the triangle, the tech triangle, which is for some reason just staying silent over this past 5 years, but people are moving there. It's still growing, but you just don't hear about it as much.
Yeah. So the question is probably more relevant to you in your role. So what are some of the non-technical traits you screen for when initially talking to a staff software engineer?
Non-technical ability to, we actually test for this. We have a documentation exercise and a conversational exercise for this that they go through in our interview process here at Stripe. Would be your ability to, since you'll be partnering with individuals that may not be technical in nature or as technical as you, so product, let's say, you need to have the ability to speak on a technical topic or subject at a level that is understandable to us that don't come from a technical background. So we're screening for just ability to translate. Is one. Like, hey, product has this, they want this coming out in 6 months. What do you require and why do you require it? and then expressing that back to product, or leadership. Unlike some companies, the Stripe's leadership is all very technical. Our CEOs created the product and they're still very hands-on. But if you have a company where your CEO did not, isn't an engineer per se, or did not create the product, or isn't as hands-on, you're going to want individuals that can speak to at an organizational level to everyone about the technical side of the product. So we're asking for that. Documentation is huge. I guess this isn't a question, but we do have this exercise. We have a documentation exercise, like a 1-pager, because we document everything. But mainly back to Darren's point about there's this belief that engineers used to like sit in a dark room, headphones on, and just code Neo style for hours and hours and hours. And then that's not what it is anymore. We're really looking for engineers that have the ability to speak to what it is they're doing and why they're doing it. And that goes not even just for our staff level. That's when we're interviewing, what we call like an L2, like an intermediate, or a senior, an L3. We're asking those same questions. We want to make sure these individuals have the ability to discuss topics with non-technical individuals. Yep. And because that adds to their ability to work cross-functionally, it helps the product move along. It helps, keeping with timelines, things like that. And it helps not having, one thing in my time at GitLab that I learned is that you never want a single point of failure. Yep. And so when everybody has that ability to speak to what it is they're doing at a non-technical level, there's no single point of failure if anyone were to, leave the organization, step away, paternity leave, sick leave, get let go, whatever it is. But yep. Sorry, that's a really long answer. For
No, it's a very, really good one. So I've seen a couple of questions in there that are asking about whether this information presentation can be provided afterwards. What I'm going to quickly do now is just quickly add, how do I use the chat functionality? Our chat won't come up for me. So if I'll get the team to reach out afterwards with this, but if you want to reach out to Darren, so that's DARREN at hackerjob.co, then reach out to me and I can send this presentation across to you. We'll be sending a lot of this stuff out over the next few weeks. But if you want it maybe for tomorrow, feel free to reach out to me on that. One of the other questions I'd seen earlier was around certifications. So I think certification is a really, really interesting one. So I think from a back-end perspective, it doesn't tend to be as important. But I think one of the things that me and JD were discussing before is, although it sucks, like the fact that still in this market, stuff like coding camps aren't as appreciated as having a master's degree or having a degree from university. So I would always say look at those coding camps, but I think that still in this marketplace, certifications are important. More importantly, probably for the back end, because it tends to be more mathematical, more algorithmic. So this is stuff that you'd learn in a computer science class. But I would say that once someone is a couple of years into their experience, probably look at what they've done rather than what university do they go to, because that's going to give you a bit of a tale of the take about whether this is someone that is going to be right for your organization or not. And we don't have a huge amount more questions in there. Feel free to send any more questions through. We've got about 5 minutes left. JD, I guess a question from me is, the problem everyone's trying to solve in this marketplace right now is diversity. Like, it's the biggest player and the biggest topic on everyone's mind. What techniques are you using at the moment to try, if you are, to solve this?
Yeah. Well, tools to start with. Shout out to Gem. Gem just released, this has been a month now, but Gem just released a tool that can track your talent pipelines based on location, name, and one other item. I cannot remember what it is. And it determines up to, like, right now it's like 75% correct. Whether someone is male, female, or identifies male, female, and if they come from a diverse background.
Yep.
So that's always a great tool to use to make sure that, your pipelines are meeting your diversity standards, whatever that for your organization may be. Things that we tend to look at are, there are, historically underrepresented universities throughout, throughout, at least in the US, where great talent comes from. We look at things like, I know we just talked about certifications and camps and things like that, but there are organizations like, example, Latinas in Tech, or is a great one that Stripe has partnered with, building out our Latina pipeline, and trying to build out those teams. Looking to partner with those organizations is kind of a win-win. You simply are, expanding your reach to individuals that may not see a job post on LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook or whatever you see. So I'd always suggest that, finding those organizations throughout, wherever it is you're hiring. If it's in the US, then there are a billion organizations that are assisting underrepresented groups within, or diverse populations get hired within tech.
Yeah. And this is very much a long play, but I think that every organization of a certain type, actually every organization probably does, has a responsibility to look to develop the future. So I think that everyone will complain about there isn't enough diversity in this marketplace, but like, what are you doing to change that? Like, are you investing into schools, or are you looking at scholarships, or what are you doing? Because if we all just complain about there's not enough diversity and steal from one another, all it results in is that in 5 years down the line, we've still got the same problem. And I think that if you look at, and this is why I think coding camps are so important. I've got a friend that has just finished a coding camp at General Assembly, and I was chatting to her the other day about all the stuff she's done. And she wasn't confident she'd be able to get a job in this market because she didn't see a lot of representation in the organizations she was applying to. So I think that the more that you can create that image internally, the more people are going to be interested in joining you, but also look at any kind of area of diversity. So I would say look at your interview process as well. So I know that I'm both dyslexic and dyspraxic. So there's multiple interviews that I did when I was first starting my career that I couldn't pass because of that. So I would say when you're looking at, just to kind of summarize, when you're looking at diversity, look at what are you doing to support this marketplace, look at your interview process, and look at some of the outside the box thinking. So look at some of these coding camps where there is a lot of diversity that wouldn't have necessarily gone to university, whether it's from a cost perspective or not having the role models to get them to go that route.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. I see a couple more questions on here. One about suggested questions to ask senior staff level backend engineers to dig into their product experience. That always is. I always ask in my first screening call, hey, give me an example of a product that you've led end to end. And obviously you can redact any, sensitive information, but I want to know that either you found an issue, developed a solution, and then implemented that solution, and what was the outcome? And I need tangible outcomes. I don't want you to tell me it worked good. I want you to tell me how much money you saved the company, how much money you made the company, how much time you saved your engineers. Did you create a coding database to where every time a new application is in initial stages, someone could just go and copy and paste like an in-house Stack Overflow, something like that. But I need tangible data, not just that I think it did well for the company and people seem to like it. We get a lot of answers like that. And then the last question, is Java still relevant in 2022? We talked about this a little bit before the call, Darren, but yes, hands down, I would say this may be a stretch, but I've never spoken with a hiring manager that did not want someone with Java experience.
I think that they even if you're a C# house, most hiring managers will be interested in someone that knows Java. So it's stuck around as long as it has because it's such a flexible language. So I would say it's as relevant, if not more relevant than it's ever been. And then the final one that I've seen at the bottom before we jump off is there a way known to you to attract more female candidates for your tech roles? I kind of touched on this. That's why I kind of left that until the last second. But look at what you have in-house. So how can you promote your organization through the women that you have in your organization? Because there's some very big brands that we've worked with over the years that when you look at their interview panel, it tends to be white males. And if I am diverse in any form and I see that through my interview process, is not very appealing to me. So create role models in your organization so that more females are coming to you. I'd also say there's a great tool called Hack a Job there's lots of female talent on. So if you're interested in hearing more, reach out to me. But we've got to the end of the session. Any final thoughts before we jump off, JD?
No, just thanks everyone for joining. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to Darren and pass them along to me, or whatever you'd like.
Cool. Well, like JD said, thank you so much for everyone joining. I've seen a few people connect to me on LinkedIn while I've been on this. My phone has been going mental. So if you've got more questions afterwards, feel free to reach out to me. If you want this content, we'll be sending it out in the next week or so, but feel free to reach out to me for that as well, and we'll get it. But thank you so much for attending, and thank you very much to JD for being a great co-host for me.
See y'all. Thank you.
Take care, guys.